Good morning. As many of you know, due to a lawsuit that was recently settled by the National Association of Realtors, there's a new model that affects the way people buy and sell homes across the United States. This short slideshow, about 9 slides, will help you to understand what the new rules mean for you as a buyer and as a seller. Thanks for giving it your time. This is a brief overview, and there's a lot more details and elements to buying and selling homes, but this is intended to allow you to get the big picture of the ruling. If you have any additional questions, I'm always here to help you. First, to understand the new rules, it's important to know how real estate transactions worked up until recently. In the old model, a seller's agent, after doing a great deal of homework, would sit down with the seller to present a selling package. As part of that package, the seller and the agent would agree on the compensation for the selling agent and for the buyer's agent. The compensation for the buyer's agent would be part of the listing information on the MLS. Now, the purpose of offering a buyer's agent compensation is to provide incentive for bringing a buyer and compensating her for completing the transaction. On the other side of the transaction, a buyer's agent would present several homes, and when the buyer decided on one to purchase, the agent, with the help of the buyer, would submit an offer, and then when it was accepted, the buyer's agent would order and review inspections, negotiate on any repairs, and then close the transaction. Remember, there's more to it, much more to it than this, but this is the high-level aspect of it all. In the old model, this is how the money was distributed. The buyer, and if the buyer had a loan, the lender would fund an escrow account, which is managed in Northern California by an escrow title company. In other places like Southern California and other places in the United States, it may be different. The escrow company would then distribute the funds in the account, first to the seller's loan, if there was one, and then to cover any fees, taxes, or other encumbrances on the property. Then to the seller's agent, to the buyer's agent, and then all remaining funds would go to the seller. Pretty straightforward, easy to understand. The new model is a little bit different. Here's how. In the new model, when a seller's agent meets with a seller and they decide to work together, as part of the contract they sign, they agree on the compensation for the seller's agent. There will probably be a discussion as to whether there will be compensation offered by the seller to the buyer's agent, as it used to be. But the buyer's compensation will no longer be posted in the MLS. It's not there anymore. Remember, as it has always been, the amount or the rate of real estate commissions is not fixed. They're negotiated between the seller and the agent. On the other side, here's a very new change. When a buyer enlists an agent to help them find a home, they are now required to sign a buyer representation and compensation agreement with the agent. This will allow the agent to represent the buyer, and it will outline the compensation that the buyer will be responsible for as part of the transaction. Again, the amount or rate of compensation is not fixed. It's set by each individual agent, and it may be negotiated between the agent and the buyer. So once the representation and compensation agreement is complete, the agent will help the buyer find a home that they want. And when that house is found, the buyer's agent will submit an offer on behalf of the buyer. This offer will most likely include a document that outlines how the buyer's agent will be compensated. So how does a buyer's agent get compensated? It can come from one of 3 different sources. First, the seller may offer credits to pay the buyer's agent. Second, the buyer can roll the compensation into the cost of the loan. Most major lending agencies are now prepared to make this happen. Third, the buyer can compensate the agent directly through the escrow process as another fee of the transaction, or it can be a combination of all 3. There are advantages and disadvantages of each of these. It just depends on the situation. So just talk it over and figure out how the best way is to proceed. But remember, The buyer is now responsible for the compensation of their agent. It's been outlined in the representation and compensation agreement that was signed at the start of the relationship. In the new model, the buyer and the lender, if a loan is required, will fund the escrow account. And then the funnel of payment is basically split into two different funnels. On the seller's side, the seller now distributes funds to pay off the loan, if there is one, pay taxes, fees, and other encumbrances associated with the property, pay the seller's agent, and then the remaining funds go to the seller. Very similar to how it used to look. On the buyer's funnel, the buyer then pays the associated fees with the transaction and also pays the buyer's agent. In this new model, with the buyer now responsible for compensation of the buyer's agent, there may be some different tax implications. So talk to your tax specialist for more details. It's not super complicated, and it may not look much different than it currently does, but the model is new, and there will be a period of adjustment to allow things to settle out. So why all these changes? And truly, who benefits from these changes? In a nutshell, it was a lawsuit in Missouri in which the National Association of Realtors were sued by a seller who claimed that they did not know that they had to pay the buyer's agent, and they felt that the compensation was basically forced on them. So as soon as the National Association of Realtors lost this case, dozens of copycat suits lined up. And in order to avoid all the financial costs of ongoing legal battles, the NAR offered these changes that we now see in order to allow its members to do what it always does best: help their clients buy and sell homes. Remember, realtor compensation has always been and will always be negotiable. And now, for good or bad, compensation will be much more a part of the conversation in real estate transactions. For me personally, I will always do everything I can to represent your best interests. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to sit down and explain this new model to you in more detail. In the meantime, I'm sending you good thoughts, always.